There we go. So yeah, let's start with the quiz and good luck, guys. Hypertext documents are transferred according to a set of rules outlined in the what? Interesting. Okay, yeah. So remember, guys, the hint was in the question on this one, because you see it says hypertext documents are transferred. So transferred, the hypertext transfer protocol. So, clearly related terminology, right? Remember, so HTML is not dictating how the HTML documents itself is transferred. The HTML is what is transferred, right? The HTML defines the hypertext documents itself. But yeah. Nice, nice. On to the next one. When creating a hyperlink with the HTML tag, which attribute points to the target URL? When creating a hyperlink with the HTML tag, which attribute points to the target URL? Okay, interesting. So yeah, it is. So remember, link is a tag itself, right? Link is a tag itself. It's not an attribute. Source is an attribute, and href is an attribute. So I'm going to remind you guys one more time. We did discuss it quite a lot in last week's lecture, but I'm going to remind you one more time how to remember it. So in an image tag, and you'll see now in a JavaScript script tag, we'll use the source attribute. And in a tag and a link tag, we use the href attribute. How to remember this? Href stands for hypertext reference. If you are pointing to a hypertext document, so like CSS, or when you're using a link pointing to another website, because that other website is just, that other web page is just defined as a hypertext document, then you use href. But images are not hypertext documents, so you use source. Okay, but yeah, let's continue. It might have just given too much of a hint actually for future questions, but we'll see. The HTML, CSS, and JS code for a web page are interpreted by the What are they interpreted by? Okay, someone's answered. Interesting. There's quite an easy way to remember this, I think. Comes down to like where, okay, interesting. Someone said client, which I like. I'm glad someone at least said client. The correct answer here is actually browser though. Okay, guys. So it's not server. We've never worked with a server before. We will work with the server in today's lecture a little bit. But yeah, the HTML, CSS, the HTML and CSS code that we wrote, you've already seen. I just put .js in there to maybe confuse you guys a little. But yeah, the HTML and CSS code we wrote, you guys remember where it ran, right? When you double click that HTML file, it opens in your browser, right? Because the browser is what interprets it. Okay. Cool. When displaying an image using the HTML image tag, which attribute points to the public URL? Okay, I did actually tell you the answer to this one. Huh, okay, good. There was still a split. So the image tag is the tag, right? The attribute is the thing that we have in it, right? So you were asked about the HTML image tag, so it's not image. Image is not an attribute. Source, so remember, if you type the image tag, you hit space inside the tag and you write source. That's what we call an attribute, the little thing inside the tag. And source is what you set to the public URL. Okay. And why do we use source in this case and not href? Because images are not hypertext documents, right? We use href for CSS and for other and URLs to web pages because those are hypertext documents. So that's quite an easy way to remember it. On to the last question of the quiz. You wrote a lot of CSS code for your web page. You want to take advantage of caching and be able to edit the CSS easily. How can this be done? Okay, guys, read carefully. I think all answers on this one will give full points if they're correct. So just make sure that you don't have to rush on this one. But this is the last thing we saw in last week's lecture. How do we point to a CSS file? This one's difficult though. Oof. That hurts, guys. Okay, so let's discuss these other possible answers. So we wrote some CSS code. Would we put the CSS in a script tag with the source attribute pointing to a separate file? So no, because so number one, you guys have never seen a script tag before because we've never worked with JavaScript. And CSS is a hypertext specification, so you wouldn't point at it with the source attribute. This next option, this you have seen. For the two of you who answered this, that's cool. Use the style tag and the head tag to hold the CSS. You have seen this before. Why don't we do it this way? And I told you at the end of last week's lecture, you want to take advantage of caching. You see it says in the question, you want to take advantage of caching. And the only way you can take advantage of caching is if the CSS is in a separate file. Remember, we explained it at the end. Maybe I'll explain it again to you guys now. This third option, use the link tag with the source attribute to point to a separate file. Very close, but we wouldn't use the source attribute because CSS is an HTML specification. It is hypertext. So you point at it with the hypertext reference. So use the link tag with the hypertext reference, the href attribute to point to a separate file. That's the correct answer. And I'll show you where we actually did this in our code now. When we start programming again. Okay, cool. Ooh, different from last week. This is because Chris, you have been on a very strong run lately, eh? So like I think you won the last two. So this is a refreshing change of pace. Chessman did very well. Nicely done. Not your day. Yeah, it happens to the best of us. You can bounce back next time. But yeah, cool. I mean, everyone got at least one right, so that's good at least. And so we had a fair distribution. Seems like you all took different things away from the lecture. Well done, Chessman. You did good. Cool. All right. So let's continue where we left off last week. I'll give you guys some reminders. Okay, actually, let me do that quick. I need to jump over to, where would this be? I know, I've lost it. There it is. Okay, cool. Here's our little site. I'm going to open up all of these inside. Okay, I'm going to open up all of them inside the text editor. Let me just open up the HTML as well. Open with other application, text editor. Cool. So here I am in index.html. This is all just the site we wrote last week. I haven't changed anything, haven't touched it since then. And you can see, so number one, I want to show you the link tag. So the one question that, yeah, everyone got wrong. The link tag over here is pointing to style.css. You see what attribute it's using to point to style.css? Hypertext reference, okay? And style.css just holds our styling, okay? It defines the background, the text aligns center, and the red color for our paragraphs. So you see we're using href to point to a CSS file inside the HTML link tag. You can see the image tag is using the source attribute. Why is it using the source attribute and not the href attribute? It's still pointing to something, right? So why is it the source attribute and not the href attribute? Because href stands for hypertext reference, and images are not hypertext documents, right? They're images, they're not hypertext documents. So you don't use href to point to images because they're not hypertext documents, you use source. But you can see in the A tag, we are using the href attribute to point to the Wikipedia article on bubble sort. Why are we using the href tag to point to that Wikipedia article? Because the Wikipedia article is a web page, right? It's a hypertext document. So you use the hypertext reference to point to it, just like you use the hypertext reference for the CSS documents. Okay, so that's an easy way to remember it, guys. You just have to think about whether what you're pointing to is a hypertext document. Is it CSS? Is it another web page? Or is it something like an image or a JavaScript file, which we'll see more of today? Okay, so hopefully that reminds you a little bit of where we were. And if you look at our site, this is where we left it off. Well, you might have a different GIF and maybe a different hyperlink. And don't worry, you will get to create your own website. That'll be like this week's sort of task, is for you guys to deploy your own website, like your own personal site. But we'll first cover JavaScript. Okay, so JavaScript's the last little bit we need to do. Cool. So last week we discussed a little bit, maybe expanded our knowledge about what the World Wide Web is and what uniform resource locators are, or like what these links actually represent, right? We have hypertext transfer protocol, the server that you're accessing, and the path to the file that you're looking for on the server. We'll see more about this. It's not literally a path, or maybe not a path as you understand it, but we'll discuss that a little bit more now. Then we also learned HTML and CSS, and we stopped just before we started covering JavaScript. So HTML is for templating. Okay, so hypertext markup language. We usually use it to define the template and layout of a web page. Okay, and we discussed a bunch of different HTML tags. Hopefully your memory of that was refreshed a little bit by the quiz. We also discussed CSS, and you can see at the bottom here, it says we point to a CSS file using the link tag with the href attribute. Okay, cool. So that CSS just defines styling, color, size, layout, fonts, all of that kind of stuff. The main thing to remember about it, why is it called cascading style sheets? What's the cascading? Because you can see it almost like cascades, like a waterfall down through the file. All they mean is that it's read from the top left to the bottom right. Okay, so the first style you define will be overwritten by later styles. So you guys must also remember that. Like if I define background color over here to be light blue, but then I define it over here to be red, the background color will be red because this was read after the styles.css. But if you want your memory refreshed on that, then check out last week's lecture, okay? That's why we're recording them. It's for later study. So we stopped with that. So we now can define templating and layout, and we can define styling. But I hope what you've noticed is that HTML and CSS are fairly simplistic, right? They can't do things like addition and division and for loops and while loops and all of that stuff that we've seen before in C#. They can't do any of that. HTML just defines templates and layout, doesn't have any for loops or while loops or anything like that. And CSS just defines style. Again, no advanced functionality. So how do we implement things that have advanced functionality like panning and zooming and swiping and for loops and addition and division? How do we do all of that inside a person's browser? Well, the answer to that is we use something called JavaScript. But before we go on to that, we're just going to briefly look into why we're doing this. Okay. So how the internet works, hopefully you guys have a pretty good understanding of this already, or like how it works when you access a website, is that we have the client, so this is you, and we have some big computer like a server sitting somewhere. Okay. You request something from the server. The server can do some stuff specified in server-side scripting. We haven't yet learned about this yet, but we will. The server, after it's done that stuff, delivers the result back to you, and you can then do stuff as well. Okay. Now, we've only seen the left side of this diagram today, and in last week's lecture. We've only worked on the client. HTML, CSS, like we never actually contact the server. Let me just make that clear. We obviously don't have a server, right? We haven't created a server yet. Everything we've been doing has been happening on our computers inside our browsers. So yeah, like the CSS, the HTML, it's all been running in our browsers, and JavaScript will also run inside our browsers. We call it client-side scripting. So the JavaScript will run inside the browser on the client. Okay. We never actually have to contact a server, and there's an advantage in that because you guys know that, let's say, for example, we have a server that is running C#. Okay, we have a C# web server. You know that it could do a bunch of that advanced functionality, right? It could run a for loop. It can do addition and division and all of that kind of stuff we can do in C#, if statements, all of that kind of stuff. But we would have to go all the way to the server in order to use that C# because the computer's browser doesn't understand. The client's browser doesn't understand C#. So we would have to go all the way to the server to run all that C# code. What JavaScript allows us to do is it allows us to run all of that complex functionality inside the browser. JavaScript browsers like Google Chrome, Mozilla, they understand JavaScript. And so we're able to do all of that advanced functionality without ever actually asking the server to do it for us. So it saves a lot of time, right? For example, if you want to run an if statement that confirms whether a username is more than 8 characters long, you don't want to go all the way to the server with the username and say, hey, by the way, is this username more than 8 characters? You don't want to have to do that. It takes so long to go to the server. The server is dealing with millions of requests at a time. You want the client, the browser, to be able to check, is this username more than 8 characters? If it is, then send it over to the server. If it's not, then ask the user to give me a new one before I send it to the server. So JavaScript allows us to do that complex functionality inside the browser. So it's a very important language to know. And yeah, we'll learn it now. So HTML and CSS are client-side. We are also learning about client-side JavaScript. All of the server-side programming we're going to be learning about in this course is C#. Nowadays, the MTA is from a time before this was true. You can see that things do advance quickly. Nowadays, there is such a thing as server-side JavaScript. But back when the MTA was created, that didn't exist. So as far as you guys are concerned in your MTA tests and stuff, client-side JavaScript is the only kind of JavaScript, okay? So it's a client-side scripting language. That's what JavaScript is, okay? So let's learn a bit about JavaScript. So yeah, JavaScript is, I say kinda because like I was explaining, it is now also a server-side scripting language, but as far as the MTA is concerned, JS is a client-side scripting language for what we call smart browsers. Now, again, when the MTA was created, some browsers like Internet Explorer didn't understand JavaScript. There were some browsers that didn't understand JavaScript. Nowadays, every single browser that you use will be able to understand JavaScript. Okay, all of them. So yeah, that's an important thing to know. So smart browsers, know the term, but it's not super useful for you guys because all browsers are smart browsers nowadays, okay? So what JavaScript can do is it can make your web pages much more dynamic and it can perform complex logic. So JavaScript is a very powerful language. It can do everything C# can do, everything Python can do, everything Java can do, pretty much. All like the practical stuff that you would want a client-side scripting language to do. If statements, for loops, while loops, all of that kind of stuff. You can define methods, you can do addition, you can do division, you can parse stuff, you can do basically anything you need. Okay, it's mainly used to enhance the interactivity and update web pages automatically. So you don't have to actually edit the HTML. You can just fetch what changes you want and update things on the fly. So like if you've ever seen a website that supports swiping or zooming or panning or any kind of mathematics, they are certainly using JavaScript. That's how it's done. A good example of something implemented fully with JavaScript is Google's calculator. You know, if you Google like Google calculator, you can use their calculator. That calculator is made totally in JavaScript. So you can do fairly advanced stuff with JavaScript. So what we're going to do, speaking of calculators, what we're going to do, we're going to add a simple option here where you'll be able to type in two different numbers. Okay, you'll click a button and JavaScript will go ahead and add the two numbers together. Okay, so what I want to do is so almost like this, our calculator is obviously not going to be as nice as Google's calculator. This took them very long to make, but we'll be able to type two numbers into the into our little calculator. Only two numbers. We're only going to support two number addition, just to keep things a little bit more simple. And then we're going to be able to hit equals, and it's going to add the two numbers together and display the results. So what do we need? So what do we need for this? We need a place to type in the first number, a place to type in the second number, a place to display the results, and a button to add them together. Okay, that's what we need for our little site. So what we're going to do, the template, the button, the place where the result displays, and the place where we'll type the two numbers, that template is going to be defined in HTML. And the logic of actually adding the numbers together is going to be displayed in JavaScript. Okay. So let's try that. And yeah, let's go for it. Cool. So I'm going to add a tag over here called break. For those of you who want to follow along, I hope you guys still have your websites from before. To be able to open up index.html, you can right-click on the document, because when you double-click it, it'll probably open in your browser. But if you right-click and hit open with other application, you should be able to find Notepad somewhere on the list of possible applications that you can use to open it. Okay. So yeah, keep that in mind. Cool. Hopefully that makes sense for you guys. And so I'm just going to go ahead. Don't worry, I will share this code with you, and you will get more practice with this because of the little task that I want to give you guys today before next week. Cool. So what we're going to do, we need a place to display the results, a place to type our first number, a place to type our second number, and a button that we click. Okay. So how we do that, we're going to say, we're going to add a paragraph tag that says results. Okay, results. So that's pretty simple. You guys know what the paragraph does. So that's just displaying results. That's all that's saying there. So that is where the results will show after you add the two numbers together. Okay, at least that's the plan. Underneath that, we're going to need the two buttons, the two fields where we're going to type our numbers. Okay, now there is an HTML tag that gives you a field like this quite nicely. You guys don't worry too much about it. Okay, you're not going to be tested on all of these little HTML tags. They are nice to know if you guys ever plan on doing more web developments, which I hope you do, because it is nice running like a little personal website. But you can see the HTML input tag quite nicely provides these two little fields. So I just put inputs. So open the input tag, close the input tag, open the input tag, close the input tag, and that added these two little fields for me here. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm also going to remove this break statement just to make them a little bit closer. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good now, actually. And the last thing we need is the button, right? We need a button that we can click. So that is done with the HTML button tag. Okay, so you just say button and close the button tag. And that'll give us a little button tag there. You can see that it doesn't have any like wording on it yet. We have to define that as well. So what I'm going to do, I think you can set value I think we can just say add over here. Okay. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to put another break so that the button tag is on a new line after the 2 input fields, and maybe another break just to get it even further down since it doesn't have any padding. There we go. Cool. So I think our calculator is looking pretty good now, but obviously currently nothing happens, right? Like you push 55, 55. If I hit add, you can see nothing is occurring, right? I click the add button and just nothing is happening. Why is nothing happening when I click the button? Because we haven't programmed anything to happen when we click a button. Okay. I do want to ask you guys, though, from what we learned in chapter 2, there are a lot of concepts we learned in chapter 2, right? There was one concept in particular that I did mention was related to buttons. So you guys will see this concept again and again and again over the next sort of 2 or 3 chapters. But what I want to say, I'll phrase it in a certain way, and hopefully one of you guys can give me the answer. So what programming constructs, okay, what programming construct would we use, and we learned it in chapter 2, to define something that must occur when another thing occurs? So something will happen, like I'll click the add button, and when I click the add button, like when that occurs, me clicking the add button occurs, some other method must run. Do you guys remember what we would use to do that? I'm wondering. How would you, what would, I could ask you it in another way. If we were sort of discussing what a button is, like when you click a button, what English word would we use to describe like an action or an occurrence? What English word would we use? I'm trying to use synonyms to not just give away the answer. So when something occurs, when there's an occurrence, I want something else to occur. How do you define that in C#, guys? I'm going to give you guys some time because it's quite interesting. Think about it. Think about it. Which options do we have? Hey, Chris. Okay, I'm impressed. Okay, so Chris messaged me. He says events, question mark. So not too confident, but yes, that is correct. I'm impressed. Cool. So when the button is clicked, that's going to fire off in a click event. Okay. When the button is clicked, it's going to fire off a click event. And when that click event occurs, we are going to ask it to run a JavaScript function. Okay. And a JavaScript function is exactly like a C# method. Okay, so JavaScript function, C# method, same thing, except one's in JavaScript and one's in C#, obviously. So yeah, we can go ahead and code that up now. First, I'm just gonna sort of introduce JavaScript to you guys, and but I'm gonna just find a nice, yeah, cool, we'll do it that way. Okay, so first thing, how do we write JavaScript inside this HTML file? Okay, so most programming, again, so remember back when the MTA was created, some browsers didn't understand JavaScript, okay? All browsers that do understand JavaScript, which is just all browsers nowadays, so all browsers, but back when the C# was created, most browsers have this idea of the script tag, the HTML script tag. And inside the HTML script tag, we can write JavaScript. Okay, so before we define this function that will be called when the add button is clicked, let's just figure out some basic JavaScript things, okay? And just see how it's similar to what we've been learning about in C#. Okay, so inside the script tag, everything that the browser sees inside the script tag will be interpreted as JavaScript. Now, just do remember this, guys, because you can be asked about it. If a browser does not understand JavaScript, usually there will be a no script tag. Okay, so you can define the HTML no script tag, and that can like print out a little error message when the browser that your user, like the client, is accessing your web page. If their browser does not support JavaScript, the no script HTML tag will go like, oh, this browser doesn't support JavaScript. I'm going to print out a little error message for the user. Okay. Nowadays, you wouldn't have to use the no script tag because all browsers understand JavaScript, but just know that it exists, okay? Because they can technically ask you, what if a browser doesn't support JavaScript? How do you print out a little error message for the user? And the answer to that is you use the no script tag. I don't know if any of you ever use like Internet Explorer to access like a modern website. You probably get a little error message saying, please update to a later browser. Oh, wow, attendance is quite good today. Welcome, guys. I see. So yeah, nice. So yeah, got the no script tag. All right. That's to define an error message that must display when the browser does not support JavaScript. Otherwise, the script tag will work and everything inside it will be interpreted as JavaScript. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with some just simple messages from JavaScript. Okay. So what we're going to do is just make sure that JavaScript is working. Okay. It will work, but we must make sure that it's working. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to print out a little message. This is similar to console.write in C#, which we've been using quite a lot, right? It's similar to console.write, and you'll see what it does now. So I'm going to say hello from JavaScript, exclamation points, okay? Now I'm going to open up my page over here. I'm going to refresh, and you can see nothing's changed. But if I push Control-Shift-I and I jump over to the console, you can see it says, hello from JavaScript. Hello from JavaScript. You see that? So what this is doing is, yeah, it's saying hello, right? So that is JavaScript that is allowing me to post that little message. You can see I define it over there, console.log. We could also write to the page as well. Although that's not like the best thing to do in JavaScript because it will like sort of break the page. But we can do it now, I guess, just to make. So you can see that this edited the console. It added a little message to the console. There's also a way to add to the actual page itself, although I'm not sure if we really want to do it because it will just break the page in a way. But let me just see. Actually, yeah, we can demonstrate it this way perfectly, I think. Cool. So JavaScript is working over here. Okay, JavaScript is working. So what we're going to do is now, so you can see that this is defined in line. If you guys remember, we could also define like a CSS code inside here, right? Like you can define CSS code in line, but it's usually better to define this kind of stuff outside of the body of your page, right? Because you don't want things to just be running over here, okay? Like it's difficult to keep track of where all your code is. Like once you get to any sufficiently large website, you're going to have thousands of lines of code. And so you want all of your like JavaScript to be in one place and all of your HTML to be in another place. So what we're going to do is instead of putting the script tag over there, I'm going to move the script tag over to the head of the site, okay? And instead, how we're going to do everything is we're going to define JavaScript functions, okay? A JavaScript function is exactly like a C# function, all right? Exactly like a C# function. So what we can do is we can say, all right, I'm going to define this little function. So function You can see it recognizes that word, right? Function, you see it's highlighted. That's a JavaScript term. I'm going to call this, what should I call this function? It's going to be called add numbers, okay? Because eventually that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to add the two numbers that you type in, okay? And I'm just going to say open curly bracket, and close curly bracket, okay? So you can see it even looks a lot like a C# method, okay? And all this is going to do is it's going to say, I think we can use a response here. I forget though. Let's at least try it just to see what goes on. Although I'm not sure if we want to, let's use console.log because it is safer. Okay. Console.log. Okay. So we're going to say button clicked. Whenever you click the button, it's going to say button clicked. Okay. Now, currently, you can see when I click the button, nothing happens still. Okay, because I haven't linked the clicking of the button to this JavaScript function. You can see the JavaScript function is called add numbers, but the button is not linked to it in any way. So what we do, if you guys remember, back when we learned about events, there was a standard way that we always named events. You say on, and then the verb that is occurring. So on click means that when the button is clicked, on click, that's the event that occurs when you click the button. And what we're going to say is it equals, and then the name of our JavaScript function. So we're going to say add numbers. Okay, add numbers. Now you can see when I refresh this, if I click add, you can see it says button clicked. If I click add, you can see it now says button clicked has been printed out twice. If I click it again, it's been printed out 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And you can see every time I click the button, it's running that add numbers method. Okay. Currently, the add numbers method isn't doing anything other than printing out button clicked. But the point for you to see is that we have used an event. Okay. We've used an event. You'll notice there is a difference. We're not saying on click plus equals in this case, just because inside JavaScript, there isn't, like, you can't link multiple methods to a single event like that. One event can only point to a single function. Okay. So it's slightly different from Thingy in that way. Slightly different from C# events in that way. Cool. But that's great. This is not yet doing what we wanted to do, though. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to be able to fetch whatever numbers are in these two fields over here, and then add them together and print out the results where it says results. Okay. So how are we going to do that? We have to be able to identify these two input fields, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to give them an ID, okay? We're going to give them an ID so that JavaScript will be able to find them, all right? So how you give something an ID, it's very simple. You just say ID equals, and then whatever you want its ID to be as a string. So I'm going to call this one number 1. And I'm going to set the second inputs field ID to number 2. This is very similar to variable names inside C#, right? So you can see ID equals number 1 and ID equals number 2. All right. Now, the result, we also need to be able to identify this results option over here. We need to be able to identify this results option over here. So I'm going to give that an ID as well. So I'm going to say ID equals result. Oh, wow, we've actually been going for quite long, but it looks like we will be able to finish this, so that's good. So I say ID equals result there, you see. So now the paragraph tag is uniquely identified by the ID result. The first input tag, number 1, the second input tag, number 2. Now what I'm going to be able to do inside this JavaScript function, I'll be able to actually access, those input fields and paragraph tags. Okay, so let's try that out. So what I'm going to do over here inside add numbers, I'm going to say var. Okay, so var stands for variable. Okay, you could also use, let's use let. Let is safer. So I'm going to say let. Okay, let. And what this will do, so this will just create a variable. Inside JavaScript, you don't have to specify a type for things. JavaScript kind of just guesses what type you're trying to use, okay? Which you'll see now, actually, that it can define a little, it can be a little bit weird sometimes that JavaScript does that, but we'll just bear with it, okay? I'm going to call it num1. So let num1, that is the name of my variable. You can kind of see this as like whatever in C#, whatever type you're using, and then the name of your variable equals. And then what I want to do is I want to get the number from this input tag. You can see that the ID of the input tag is number1. So I'm going to say documents. So the documents is like the entire hypertext document, okay? It's the object that represents the entire hypertext document. You can say documents dot get elements by ID, okay? And I'm going to say number1. So you see number1 is the ID of the element that I'm looking for inside the document. So I'm looking for this input element and its ID is number1. So I'm saying dot get element by ID number1. Okay. So yeah, so the ID is just a unique way for JavaScript to be able to identify that field. And then you can, and yeah, actually I'm going to leave it there for now. Although, so what we don't need the entire input tag, right? The input tag is representing an object. What we need is the value that is held inside that input tag, right? So how we get out the value is we say dot value. And you should recognize this format from C#, right? Where you say dot and then the thing that you're looking for. Okay, so value is just an attribute inside our input field. Okay, so that's the value that the input field is holding. You can access it using value. Cool. And then I'm just going to, so just to make sure that it's working, I'm just going to say console.log num1. Okay, console.log num1. Because it can be a little bit finicky sometimes. So let's just make sure that it's working. If I type a 5 here, you can see that it prints it out 5 in the thing when I clicked add. When I type 6 there, you can see it prints out 6. If I type 7, you can see it'll print out 7. Okay, so that's working. It's able to go and fetch the value of this input tag. You can see that the second one we haven't programmed up yet. So let's program up that one as well quickly. And then we'll pretty much be done with this little small project here. So I'm going to say let num2 equal, and then a very similar thing. We're going to say documents dot get element by ID, but which I want you guys to tell me this time, what ID am I going to be fetching? Guys, what am I going to type inside these little quotation marks? What am I going to type? Can anyone predict what I'm going to type inside those quotes? So I want to get, hey, nice, Clark. Yeah, exactly. So we're going to say number2, okay? So we're going to go and get that second input tag. I'm also going to say dot value because I want the value from the input tag. I don't just want the object representing it. So I'm going to say dot value. And then all we're going to do is inside results, so inside this paragraph tag over here, I'm going to want to set that paragraph tag to whatever the sum of these two numbers is. Okay, so I'll do that now. So I'm going to say documents dot get element by ID. Okay, and remember, so you won't be tested on like practical JavaScript. I am showing you guys this stuff so that if you ever want to create like a complex personal website for you guys, you'll at least have some understanding of JavaScript. But there's a lot to learn about JavaScript. There definitely is a lot to learn about JavaScript. So yeah. Cool. So how you set, you can see that what is displayed in results. You can see that it's the, so I'm going to just drop the ID from the paragraph tag, just so it looks familiar to what you've seen before. You can see that I've got a paragraph tag, okay, opening. Then I've got the whatever I want to display inside the paragraph. So in this case, it's results, right? Just the word results, okay? You can see I've got result there. And then I've got the closing paragraph tag. What JavaScript calls the part that's between the two tags is the inner HTML. right? Because it's inside the tag. So this result is what is referred to as the inner HTML, okay? That little result there. The result inside the tag, that result is referred to as the inner HTML because it's between the two tags. So how you can update that in JavaScript is you can say dot inner HTML equals, and then whatever you want to set it to. So for example, we want to set it to num1 plus num2, okay? And let's go ahead and just double check that that works. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to refresh our page quickly. And I'm going to type in what I want, the two numbers that I want to add, let's say 5 and 6. When I click add, ooh, it gives me 56. Interesting. So is that the best calculator you've ever seen before or what? So can anyone tell me like why do you think this is happening? It's quite interesting, but like from the logic we know from C#, what is it doing here? What type are 5 and 6? What is it giving us when we type these numbers into the input tags and then we fetch them? What type are they? There's strings, exactly, Clark. So you've, exactly, Damien, there's strings. So you can see if we type like dog and cat and add them, it gives us dog cat because that's how strings are added together, right? So this is the problem with JavaScript. So JavaScript is a very powerful language, but because it doesn't have types, or at least it doesn't enforce types. It just kind of works with what you give it. It's very difficult to tell if it's using the correct type, right? Because we didn't say int, right? We didn't say int num1, int num2, because JavaScript doesn't understand that. So it just says let num1 equal. So it just infers the type. It guesses what type you're using. So what we have to do is still tell JavaScript explicitly that currently what we want is an integer. Okay, we are working with integers. And how we do that is we just tell JavaScript to pass this input as an integer. So how you do that is you say pass int and you wrap. So you say pass int, it's just a method. And you wrap whatever you want to be passed as an integer inside that method. So you can see I've got pass int, open and close normal brackets, and whatever I want to be an integer as far as JavaScript is concerned, we put inside those two little brackets. And I'm going to do that with the second one as well. I'm going to tell it to pass this as an integer instead of using it as a string. Okay, and hopefully that's going to make our calculator work a little bit better. So now I'm going to go over here. You have to refresh. Remember to refresh. Then say 5, 6, and you can see now it gives us 11. Okay, so our calculator is working. All right. So yeah, JavaScript, it can get a little bit complicated with all of the types and how all the types work. But yeah, it's still quite a powerful language, and once you figure it out, you can do a lot of stuff with it. Everything, actually, you can do everything. Cool. So that's almost it for JavaScript. But once again, we've got the script.js file, right? What does nan mean? Nice, Chris. I'm glad that you found this out. So nan, I'll show it to you guys here now. So if I say, I'm going to say a plus 6, okay? A plus 6. I'm going to hit add. And you can see it says nan because I'm trying to add the letter A as an integer to 6. So what nan stands for, nan stands for not a number, not a number. Okay, so it's just JavaScript telling you, what do you mean? I can't interpret A as an integer. It's not a number. Okay, so that's just JavaScript trying to tell you that you're asking it to do something crazy. Okay, so what you could hypothetically do, Chris, is you could have like an if statement that says if the result is a nan, then ask the user to type an actual number into the fields because this is not a number. Okay, not a number. That's what nan stands for, and it's because we're trying to add something that's not a number as an integer to something that's an integer. Okay, and obviously JavaScript doesn't know how to do that. Cool, but very good question, Chris. Cool that you found that. Cool. All right, great stuff. So you can see that we've got our JavaScript over here, right? We've got our JavaScript over here. And once again, what if we want to take advantage of caching, right? So let me just remind you guys of this one more. I'll So we will take a break now. Don't worry. I just want to finish off the JavaScript stuff because then we'll move on to server-side scripting in the next half of the lecture. But what I want to show you, I just want to remind you guys. So you can see if I push Control-Shift-I or right-click and hit Inspect. So if you right-click and hit Inspect, you can see that under Sources, under the Sources tab, you can see that we have our index.html, which is all of the HTML code that we've defined. You can see even our little JavaScript script is over there as well. And in styles.css, we have the styling of our web page, right? So you guys can see that is being fetched. The browser is interpreting this information. Now, you can see we've defined a script.js file. Let's say, hypothetically, I change finally getting started with chapter 4 to finally getting started with chapter 5, for example. Now, when you refresh the website, if I changed that, you would have to refetch all of the body of the page. You would have to refetch this entire HTML document, okay? Which means even though the script didn't change, even though the JavaScript script didn't change, all I changed was that 4 to a 5, the JavaScript script didn't change, you would still have to refetch the entire JavaScript code, right? What programming it in this means also is that when you change the JavaScript file, you have to enter into the HTML file and know that the JavaScript is defined over there. That's not very neat, guys. So what we prefer to do usually is we do not define JavaScript directly in the HTML file like this. We create a separate JavaScript file like this. We paste exactly the same. It's still just JavaScript. So we paste the exact same code. Okay, so I just right-click, hit cut or Control-X, and you paste the JavaScript code exactly into script.js. And then what we're going to do is tell HTML to fetch the JavaScript from script.js. And how do we do that? JavaScript, it is not hypertext. JavaScript is not hypertext. So we do not use href because href is hypertext reference. We use source. So I'm going to say script source equals, and then I'm just going to say script.js, script.js. Okay, and that's going to go over there, and it's going to fetch the JavaScript code from the from that JS file. Exactly the same JavaScript code. I haven't changed it at all. But now you'll notice when I refresh, you can see it's gone and fetched script.js. You can see it's now got index.html, style.css, and script.js. So now if I change the HTML documents, I don't have to refetch all the JavaScript code, and all of my JavaScript code is neatly in a nice place. Okay, so that is what we call cache storage. Cache storage. Script.js is stored locally, and I don't have to refetch it all the time, only when it changes. Okay, so now you can see that if I type 5 and 6, everything still works exactly like as if the script.js, if the script was defined over here, it's exactly the same. But now the JavaScript is in a separate file. Okay, so that's the last thing. We use the script tag with the source attribute to point to a separate JavaScript file if we want to define our JavaScript in that other file. Okay. And yeah, that is it for what we're going to cover on terms of client-side web development. Just before we take a break, actually, I can show you after we take a break because we haven't gone a little bit too long. So I'll say, let's come back at like 10:05, guys, 10:05, so like a 9-odd-minute break. And then we'll get started with the next part of today's lesson. Okay, but yeah, so that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Hopefully you guys have a good understanding of how you can create a basic web page. And remember, you can use these as building blocks. You can easily learn. You can visit their HTML cheat sheets and CSS cheat sheets. Don't be afraid to Google and research when you have a problem and you want to do something. Okay, the internet is obviously a very fantastic resource. Cool. Okay, what do I write in the script line to access the JavaScript in the JS file? So all you have to do is add the source file, this source attribute over there, Chris. Very similar to how we accessed an image at a public URL. You say source and then the name of the JavaScript file. So script.js is the name of my JavaScript file. Okay. Yours would also be script.js, I think, but you can call it whatever you want. You can access whatever file you want. They're just usually called like script.js or something like that. So you just have the script tag, and inside it, you define the source attribute to be script.js. Okay. I can also just send it to you. Let me just do that. I'll post it in the chat. But obviously, script.js must be the name of your JavaScript file, okay? And make sure that it's in the same folder. Ooh, that's an important thing. So you see my script.js is right there, right next to index.html. They're in the same folder, okay? Otherwise, you have to specify the full path to script.js, okay? If they're not in the same folder. So just make sure they're in the same folder. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna need my Windows computer now, and I'm on Linux on my laptop, so I'm just going to switch over because I also connected my desktop to the call. Oh, okay, cool. I'm glad you figured it out there. Cool. Yeah, so the attributes are always inside. They're not the inner HTML. The attributes are defined inside like the opening tag. But yeah, that's an easy mistake to make. Okay, on my other computer now, or my computer as opposed to my laptop. Let me just see.
Right, I'm back again. Sorry, I didn't, if someone was talking, I didn't have my headphones on because I was just responding to a message quick. So if you had a question, please ask again. Cool. But it is 10:05, so let's get started again. We're now starting with the server-side aspect of development. So we've only been discussing client-side development. But I do want to just show you guys something. So this week, I'll post it on the WhatsApp group after the lecture is done as well. Let me just make sure you guys can hear me and stuff. You can. Cool. So I've got like a YouTube tutorial kind of thing because it's not directly related to the lecture, but it's nice to have some kind of output, like practical output other than the certificates at the end of the course. So this week I'll post this tutorial video on the group. It's 20 minutes. It'll teach you how to set up a website for free on Google Firebase hosting. And yeah, so like all the students that I've lectured have done it, and it's quite cool to get a personal website out of it. This will work on Windows computers. If you only have like a Mac or a Linux computer, I'll be happy to sit and help you and like talk you through how to install things and whatever. But if you've got a Windows computer, this tutorial will work for you. And if you have any questions, feel free to just ask me like on WhatsApp and I'll talk you through it, or maybe like in the next lecture, you can share your screen and we can go through what problems you're having. But yeah, so I'll post this tutorial. The like homework for this week, if you like, is to follow it and set up your own personal website for free that other people will be able to access. So like I set up this like this is my personal website. I set it up by following this exact tutorial, essentially. Like obviously it's not going to show you how to design something like this. It'll just show you how to get something running. Okay. And it'll work in the exact same way we have now, where you'll have an HTML file, a CSS file, and a JS file, and you'll be able to just edit those and do it how you like. Okay, cool. And feel free to ask me any questions about it as well. But anyway, without further ado, let's continue with the actual course, like the stuff that you can be tested on. And great. So, yeah, the first thing we have to discuss is like sort of why we're learning this. So we have covered so far we've only covered the client side aspect of development. Okay, so when developing an actual website, you'll usually have a server, and the server communicates with the client according to what we call a specific framework. Okay, so there are many different frameworks in the world, like Express.js and Django and many others. The one that works with C# is called .NET or ASP.NET, the ASP.NET framework, the .NET framework. Okay, the .NET framework you can see. Cool. So where does like a framework fit into the equation? It's, I don't know, I like this Venn diagram. It seems to explain it quite well. It's the thing that sits between the clients and the server. It's like the interface between them. It's how they are able to communicate and exchange information in a way. So yeah, cool. So ASP.NET is an infrastructure. So we'll discuss the components of ASP.NET on the next slide. .NET is called the framework. And so it's usually used in conjunction with C#. It also works with Visual Basic. So it's very common that people would use Visual Basic. There's also a language called F# that it also works with, but obviously we only care about C#. So just establishing why we're learning this. You guys are doing the MTA. MTA is Microsoft Technology Associate. So Microsoft is in the name. Microsoft made C#, like Microsoft made C# as like a competitor to Java. So Microsoft made C#, so that's why we learned C#. And we're now learning about web applications. And so it's natural that we would learn about ASP.NET, because ASP.NET is the web framework that you use to make web apps in C#. Okay, so that's sort of why we're learning this, just to give you guys some context. So yeah, we'll go again into just this whole distinction between sort of clients and server. So the client does stuff specified in client-side scripting, and we've seen that now, right, with like JavaScript and HTML. It can make requests to the server. The server will do other stuff in server-side scripting, okay, and deliver back a result to the client that can be rendered in the browser and interpreted by the browser. So we are now just learning the other side of the equation. How do we do stuff on the server? What does the server do in that server-side scripting? We've seen the kind of stuff that the client can do. What would the server do? Okay, and the framework defines, number one, what language the server is running. So like, is it using C#? So like if you're using ASP.NET as your framework, then you'll be using C# or Visual Basic on the server. If you're using Django as your framework, you'd be using Python on the server. If you're using Express.js as your framework, then you're going to be using JavaScript on your server. Okay, so there's a lot of different possibilities. In our case, we're using ASP.NET as our framework, so we'll be using C# on the server. It also defines what format the communication between the clients and the server takes. Okay, so you'll understand this format a little bit more later. Okay. So there are two things that you must just remember, because you can be asked this. In fact, it's not something that you just have to remember, because it's fairly straightforward, I think. But so let's discuss it now. There are two components to the ASP.NET infrastructure, okay? So the one is the system.web namespace, and you guys know what a namespace is. It's just a collection of classes. So the system.web namespace has a bunch of classes and interfaces that enable communication between browsers and servers, okay? So it's got a namespace. That's what the ASP.NET has. And the other thing that ASP.NET has is what's called the ASP.NET worker process. So you can see it's ASP.NET _wp.exe. And the worker process is just the thing. It's a process that runs on the server and that actually handles the requests, actually processes the requests, because obviously you need something running on the server that actually makes ASP.NET work, right? Like you can't just have like a server that's not running anything. There needs to be some executable that the server runs. And that is the ASP.NET worker process. Okay, so these are the two parts that make up the ASP.NET infrastructure with the .NET framework. Okay, so cool. So that's actually all the summarization you need about ASP.NET. And from there, we're actually just going to jump into creating a website that's using both ASP.NET and sort of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So how are we going to do that? I've got Visual Studio 19 over here. So actually, I suppose we should Visual Studio 2019 Community Edition. I'll just show you where to get this, because we would have distributed this to you on a flash drive before as well. But we obviously couldn't give you the flash drive because of the whole, coronavirus. But you can just follow along with me for this week. You don't have to install it now, but before next week, do. So if you have a Windows computer, if you don't worry about it. I will give you enough information in like in the lectures. So you don't worry about it if you don't. But Visual Studio is quite a nice thing. So you can visit the site, visualstudio.microsoft.com/vs, download Visual Studio Community 2019, and it'll just install, and you'll end up with this nice little thing over here, right? Like you can see it's Visual Studio 2019 installed on your computer. Okay. And it's totally free and it works quite well. But you do need quite a beefy computer. It won't work with like 2 gigs of RAM or something. It'll be very slow. Okay, cool. So that's that. Okay, so from there, I am just going to start by creating a new sort of web application project inside Visual Studio. So there, I'm just going to click Create a New Project. And it'll give you a list of all of the possible items. When you guys, if you are installing Visual Studio, make sure you just install .NET, okay? So like the .NET framework, make sure you install that. And yeah, so what we're gonna start with is an ASP.NET web application, okay? So somewhere in this list, you would be able to find ASP.NET web application. Remember, there is one for Visual Basic as well, because it can work with C# or Visual Basic. Make sure you use the one with C#. C# and Visual Basic are very similar, but like they are slightly different. And it would be very infuriating if you're expecting to be working in C# and are actually working on Visual Basic. Okay, so cool. So you open up a new project in Visual Studio. I'm just going to create it. So web application 1, that's not the greatest name for a web application. Who won the quiz today? It was Chessman. So we're going to call our project name Chessman. I'll call the solution, I'm just going to call, I guess, chapter 4. Okay, so chapter 4. I'm going to make sure that I save it to the correct folder. So just going to find that folder quickly on my computer. Workspace. Cool, select folder. Okay, and so there we go. I've done sort of the basic setup for the little project, and I'm just going to hit create. Okay, so that's going to go ahead and create up a sort of a web application for us. We are going to make it empty. All right, so there are other options like which makes sense, but we're going to make ours empty. So I'm just going to hit empty and hit create. It's going to take a while. It always does. Because it is generating like 60 megabytes of files when it does this. But I suppose while the project is creating, we can move ahead. Okay, so as I was saying, so a client can make a request from a server. This request has a particular format. There's some rules that the server follows in order to be able to process the request. All frameworks have slightly different ways of handling these requests. And so what we're going to discuss is ASP.NET's way of handling the request. Okay, so ASP.NET, when handling a request, the request goes through what we call the page lifecycle. I think you guys have realized by now that developers really like life cycles because we've seen a few life cycles, right? Like chapter 3, we saw a life cycle with the application life cycle. We're seeing another life cycle now. This is a different life cycle. This is a life cycle that the page goes through. So the request goes through to generate the page that will be sent back to the browser. Okay, all of this happens on the server. You can see this request on page 97 of the PDF that was sent on the group, the chapter 4 PDF. So that's page 97 of what would be the textbook, not of the PDF itself. And yeah, so there are a number of different stages, 8 stages in the page lifecycle. And some of the stages also fire off different events. So it's formatted in a certain way. In your book, I've created like what I think is a nicer format in the slides for you guys to study from. Cool. So our little web application has finished generating here. So that's very cool. And yeah, so let me just do this quickly. Okay, we'll leave it for now. So let's discuss the different stages that an application goes through in order to process this request. Actually, you know what? No, so we are going to create like an example so that we can work on the example while we discuss it in the lecture slides. And I think, guys, focus on what I'm saying here now. If you do have Visual Studio installed, maybe wait for next time that you will get a chance to play with it. So I'm going to say add a web form to the. So it's doing that. Cool. So it's created a little web form for us. Here it is. I'm going to say, so we're going to build this application. So I'm going to say build solution. And cool. So I'm just going to view this in the browser quickly. So it automatically generated this. Do you guys recognize this? Can anyone tell me, what is this? What is this, guys? It looks slightly more complicated than how you've seen it before, but what code is this? What language is that? That you see on my screen now. What language is that? It's HTML, exactly. So you guys can see, so this is a C# app, right? Like we just said, we're creating a C# server, but you can see that this is working in HTML, and that's because that's all the browser understands. So essentially what we need to do is what ASP.NET does is it defines a way for our C# server to interpret and edit HTML code, okay? And then it gives the HTML and the CSS back to the user, okay? So the server is able to edit it in some basic ways to handle some processing, and it gives that back to the browser to render because the browser doesn't understand C#, so it can't give the browser C#. So you'll see here, I've got some web form. Behind the web form, we have this, okay? So you see the web form is called web form 1, okay? And behind the web form, we have this class called web form 1, okay? A C# class. So you can see that we've got C# running on the server, and the C# is linked to a particular web page, okay, or a particular web form in this case, okay. So cool. So we'll discuss the process that the server goes through in order to process this request. But also, I just want to show you now. So I'm going to right click and hit View in Browser. So I'm going to just hit View in Browser. And this is just going to open up in its Visual Studio. It's made by Microsoft. It's going to open up in Microsoft Edge. You can change what the default Visual Studio browser is, but to be honest, I don't really mind that much. So it's just slowly opening up the web form inside the browser. It takes a little while the first time it does it, but it does get faster. Okay. Cool. It's opening. It's opening. I'm going to inspect as well. Okay, cool. So it's run. Again, our web form is not doing anything yet, right? It has nothing on it. You can see it is basically just a blank body, right? It's like basically an empty body. It's got this form, but that's not actually doing anything. So yeah, so it's running our page, and you can see the browser only understands the HTML. It's not doing anything else. The browser is just rendering HTML over here. Okay, so cool, that's that. So we've got a web form that can be opened in a browser. That's the main thing. So how is this processed? What is the process that the server goes through and the client goes through in order to process the request? So actually, all of this is happening on the server. So let's go through what happens when the server receives a request. So obviously this starts, how the page lifecycle starts, is it receives a request from a browser, okay? So all that means is that a person inside their browser visits some particular URL that's running on a server, or that the server has access to, and that URL accesses the server, right? And that posts a request to the server. So basically, it's just that a client is making a request, okay? A client is making a request. That's the first stage. The first thing the server does is it checks. It goes, okay, I respond to millions of requests a second. The server responds to many, many requests. And it goes like, okay, I must just check, have I responded to a very similar request to this recently? So then that's called checking the cache. Okay, so it checks its cache storage. It checks, have I responded to this request already? If I have, I can just send that like pre-generated response back to this request. I don't have to do anything new. But if this is a totally new request, if I need to handle something different, then I'm going to go along with the rest of the cycle. So first it checks, have I responded to a similar request? It checks its cache. And we've discussed what cache is, right? If like nothing has changed, if I've responded to exactly this request, I already have the response for the other time I responded to it. So I can just send that same response back to this user. Like, for example, if you're requesting the home page of a site, right? And everyone receives the same home page. Like if I visit the homepage of this site, everyone will receive the same homepage, right? So when I request this homepage from the server, it doesn't have to process a whole new request. It already knows that, okay, this is just a request for the homepage. There's no customization going on here. I'm just going to serve the homepage to the user, and it can be like instant. Okay, so it doesn't have to go through the full page lifecycle. Okay, cool. So that's the first thing it does. If it hasn't responded to the request before, then it'll go on to the next stage of the life cycle. And now the life cycle starts properly. Okay, so it goes into what is called the start stage. Okay, the start stage of the application life cycle. Okay, so at this stage, the first thing that's checked is the computer will check, is this a post back? Okay, is this request a post back? Now, what do we call a post back? You guys probably don't know what a post back is, so let's discuss it. Ooh, I hear someone on the mic. Hey, if you're, I don't know if it's a question or something though. But okay, so what is a post back? So what I'm going to do, the first time you visit a page, okay, so this is the first time I'm visiting this page. I hard refreshed, so Control-Shift-R. This is the first time I'm visiting this page. This was not a post back. Okay, this was not a post back. It was giving me a fresh page, okay, a totally clean page. There was no customization that I could have been doing on this page, okay. And you can see if I click login in the top right, this was also not a post back. It was the first time I was receiving this page. Okay, it was the first time that I was receiving this new login page. Now, what would be a post back is if from the same page, so from the login page that I've already accessed, I'm going to use a post. I'm going to post some information to the server from this login page. Okay, so I'm going to post, I've put the wrong password there. So I'm just going to post this new, I'm going to post this page to the server. Okay, so I'm going to hit sign in. Okay, so that's called a post back. So you can see it's given me the exact same page back, except it's edited some basic information. It just tells me that the email address and or password that I specified are not correct. Okay, so that was a post back. All right, why? Because I posted some information to the server and it responded back. Okay, pretty simple. Okay, so that's why it's called a post back. Okay, so the first thing it does in the start stage is it checks, is this a request for a totally new page, or am I being sent some information from a page that I have already shared with the user? Okay, so is it a post back? It's just checking, is it a post back? Okay. What else happens on the start stage? It sets some basic properties. So like it sets the type of the request that the server will need. So let me just show you this. You guys don't have to remember all the you do have to remember the one property it sets. So one of the properties it sets is postback. And is postback just says, is this request a postback? Yes or no? So guys, from what you know about C#, what type would is postback be? What type would is postback be? It's just saving like yes or no, basically. Or like 1 or 0 almost. What type is postback? Okay, it's a page property, so it's a property, it's just a variable. Exactly, Clark, it's a Boolean, precisely. So is postback just holds true. So if is postback is set to true, that means the request is a postback. If it's set to false, then the request was not a postback, okay? But there are some other properties, like the request property I'll show you now. So if you jump over to, let me just figure out where this would be, because it might be a little bit of a mission to find. Where would this be? Maybe a network. Let me hit refresh. Yeah, okay. I think we'll be able to find it here. Cool. Okay, cool. So you can see that a lot of stuff is happening here. These are all the requests that have been sent over the network. And you can see that it's got a bunch of properties here. You can see that there are an awful lot of them, okay? Origin, referrer, all of these kinds of stuff. And so these are all obviously on my browser. These are all in my browser. But the server has its own properties as well, including one called request method. So this was a post. Why is it called a post? Because I'm sending data to the server. I'm posting some information, like a letter almost. I'm posting something to the server. Okay, I was posting my email address and my password. I was posting them to the server. So the request type was a post. So that's one of the properties other than is postback. That's another example of a property that would be set at the start stage. Okay, so that's what's happening on the start stage on the server. It's setting all of these page properties, just making sure that we understand what the request is and like how we have to process this request. Okay, cool. Now, you can see, so these stages just occur. These stages are strictly defined. I cannot modify them. Okay, the request stage, I cannot modify. The start stage, I cannot modify it directly, okay? C# has or ASP.NET rather, ASP.NET has a certain sequence of steps that it goes through at the start stage, and that is not modifiable. It is a strict thing, okay? But you can write code that runs at a particular stage, okay? You can write code that runs at a particular stage. How you do it, so the start stage will fire off an event, okay? The start stage will fire off an event. And some of the stages, and I'll point them out to you, there are 5 stages that fire off events. So the start stage will fire off an event called pre-init, pre-init, okay? Init stands for initialization. So this is pre-initialization. That's the name of the event, okay? So when this event is fired off, obviously, and you guys have seen this before, we can link certain methods to that event, right? Like when that event occurs, we can make certain methods run. So if you have some code that you want to run during the start stage, so if you have some code that must modify page properties or some code that must run before page properties are set, then you would link it to the pre-init event, okay? So you'll see there are some other events that we'll discuss in a bit, but that's cool. So we've got the start stage. It fires off the pre-init events. So any code that we want to run during the pre-init events, and I'll show you an example of this now, you would link to the pre-init event. Okay, cool. So the next stage, so guys, understand there is a flow to this. So at the start stage, we fired off the pre-init event, so pre-initialization. The next stage that we go into is initialization. So the pre-init events flowed into the initialization stage. Okay, so pre-init and then initialization stage. Okay, so what happens at the initialization stage? You guys have seen inside when we're working with classes and objects, right? So everything is a class. As you guys have seen with our little JavaScript code, the input tag was an object, right? The input tag was an object. It had like .value, .inner HTML, .whatever. Okay, so these are all just objects. Okay, they're all just objects, which means they're instances of a class. Okay, which means that they have to be initialized, right? They have to be created. Like when you create a object of type rectangle, for example, you have to say rectangle rect1 equals new rectangle. When you create an object of type person, you have to say person1 equals new person. Okay, and it's the same for all of these other things. When you create a button on the server, when you create a button or editing a button, you have to initialize it. You have to say button new my button equals new button, for example. Okay, so the initialization stage is where all of the controls on the page are initialized. Oh, yeah, sorry, what's up?
Sorry, no, you can continue.
Okay, I can continue. Cool. Don't worry, we'll see some examples of how we can attach things. So cool. So at the initialization stage is where all of those, where that initialization of controls occurs, okay? The initialization stage, again, it's a fixed thing. It has a sequence of steps that it follows through, but it also fires off an event called the init event, so if you want something that runs before the controls of the page are loaded, so while the controls and stuff are being initialized, so while all the objects are being initialized, you can link it to the init event. This wouldn't happen usually. You wouldn't usually want this. But if you're asked, like, what event would you link some code to if it needs to be run before the controls are loaded, you would link it to the init event. So this event and this stage, so the initialization stage and the init event, occur before the controls are loaded. So that's an easy way to remember that the next stage that occurs is the load stage, okay? So this is any code that is specific to the page's controls. So all of the controls are loaded. And what do we mean by that? Like if you change the text that is on a button, if you are changing this from like a hidden field to a text field, because this was hidden, this little error was hidden or it was loaded, okay? So anything like that, any changes to the page's controls, like buttons or input fields and stuff like that, all of those are loaded at this load stage, okay? So all of them were initialized, so they were created, like button, my button equals new button, was initialized at the previous stage, and then my button.inner HTML equals sign in would run at the load stage, and it would be like loaded into the request, okay? Remember that all of this is still happening on the server. The client hasn't received anything yet. All of this was happening on the server, okay? Cool. So if you want any code that is, so this is where you do most of your code. If you want any code that is specific to the page that you are working on, which is almost always, right? Like if you're editing some code in ASP.NET, it's probably for a specific web page. So any code that you want that is specific to the page or the page's controls would be linked to the load event. So the load stage fires off the load event, and you can link some code to the load event. Okay, that's not, again, you guys will see an example of this now. Okay, cool. The next stage is called postback. So the kind of thing that would happen here is, so this stage will only run if is postback is true. So you can remember, like at the start stage, we checked, is this request a postback? At the start stage, we checked, is this event a postback? If it is a postback, we said, is postback to true, right? We said, is postback to true. Now, since is postback is true, we know for all of these future stages whether or not the request is a postback. So if it is a postback, then at this postback stage, we'll handle everything specific to a page postback. So a good example of what we might handle at a postback is like when I'm logging in here, if I am setting my password over here, so I set my password, the validation that occurs, so like the validation for the postback, like is my email address in the correct format? Is the password correct? All of that kind of stuff. Is this a valid entry in the database? All of that kind of stuff would happen at the postback stage, stage. And there is no way for us to attach anything to the postback stage. It's just for C#. It handles things. You must know it exists because that's where all of that stuff is handled if you haven't handled it yourself at the load event. But yeah, so all of that stuff happens at the postback. There's no way for us to link to the postback. It's handled by itself. Okay. C# handles it for us. Okay, cool. Remember, now all of this has been happening on the server. Okay, all of it has been happening on the server. This next stage is literally just a warning. All right, it's just a warning for you. It's called the pre-rendering stage, So the request is ready to be rendered. It's ready to be prepared and sent back to the user, okay? This last stage is just to tell you that as a developer, this is your last chance to change anything about the request. Usually, you would not leave something this late, okay? Like this is just like a final warning. So the pre-rendering stage fires off the pre-render event. And this is just to warn you that after this, there is no turning back. The request is about to be sent from the server to the user. Okay, so this is your last chance to modify your response to the request. It's your last chance to modify the response. Okay, and if you want any code that at the last minute will modify that response, then you can link it to the pre-render event. Okay, this is just like a warning. Okay, this is your last chance. After the pre-rendering stage, we render, okay, the rendering stage. So now the response is rendered, and then it's sent back to the user at the unload stage, okay? Again, there's nothing you can do here really, but the unload stage does fire off an unload event. And the kind of thing that you would do at the unload event is just cleaning up, okay, cleaning up the server. So if there was some variables that you needed to delete, some memory that you had to clean up, some database connections that you needed to close, like let's say you were running some kind of encryption algorithm and it's taking up a lot of memory. You want to like close the encryption algorithm so that it doesn't use too much of your server resources. All of that could be linked to the unload event, but you can't modify the response. The response was already sent. So the unload stage sends the response, discards all the page's properties, and you can like further clean up the memory and stuff if you want to attach to the unload event. Okay. And that is the full page lifecycle. There is one other stage that they don't show in your book, which we will actually see today, the error stage. Okay, so any of these stages in the page lifecycle, if an error occurs, so if any error occurs at any of the stages, you'll just jump to the error stage. Okay, you'll just jump to the error stage. Okay, and that is the full ASP.NET page lifecycle. That is how a request is processed from start to finish. Okay. So again, this might seem very abstract for you guys now, but we'll see some examples and just try to make sense of it all. Okay. Okay, cool. So what we want to do is I want to give you guys an example of just like how exactly this is occurring. Okay, like what exactly is going on. So the life cycle itself, so the stages, request, start, initialization, load, postback, pre-rendering, rendering, unload. As I've said a number of times now, that is set, okay? There is no way to alter that. That is how ASP.NET will respond to a request every single time, okay? There's no way for us to modify that. What we can modify is the code that runs when these events occur. So I can attach code to each of the stages by attaching it to the corresponding event. So either pre-init, init, load, pre-render, or unload, okay? And so that's where we actually write our code as developers. ASP.NET handles the bulk of the request, and any code that we want to add to that, we add to these events. So let's see how we do that for our simple page over here. So we have this simple page over here. It is, you can see it's HTML, but you can see on the server, it's saved as .aspx, okay? So this is ASP.NET code, okay? This is like ASP.NET's format for HTML, if you like. And cool, at the top here, something to understand, we set auto event wire up to true. I'll explain what that does now. And we've got like a little basic HTML page here, okay? behind this, so you can see that this is pointing to webform1.aspx.cs. Okay, that is this file over here. That is our little CSS file over here. Okay, now, cool. So we can link to each of the events. You can see by default, it's created this method called page_load. Page_load. Now, you guys know that usually when we want to attach a method to an event, we would say like whatever the event is. So if I was typing it, I'll type it here. So we would say like whatever the event is, plus equals, and then whatever the name of the method is that we want to add to it, right? Like the name of the method, okay? Right, that's how we would usually attach to an event. Now you can see that that is quite a schlurp, if that makes sense. It's a bit annoying, right? You don't want to have to type this out every single time you want to attach to the load events or the pre-init events or the init events or the pre-render events or the unload events, okay? So what's setting auto event wire up to true does, so this Boolean over here, auto event wire up equals true. What's setting that to true does means that when you mention the name of the event like this, you see _load. If I say page_pre-init, page_init, page_load, page_pre-render, page_unload, those method names are automatically linked to the event that they are named after. Okay, so page_load, this method, because auto event wire up is set to true, this method will automatically be linked to the load event. Okay, it'll automatically be linked to the load event. So let's do this. What we're going to do, we're going to define some basic code that we want to run at each of the event stages. Okay, so I'm going to say at the page load events, I'm going to say response.write hello from load. Hello from the load event. Okay, and I'm just going to add a line break there as well. Okay. So there we go. All this event will do, all the load event is going to do, is it's going to print out hello from the load event. Okay. I'm going to build this code, so translate it into machine code so that the computer can understand it. And then I'm going to open this up in my browser again. Okay, so view in browser. And you can see that's now opening up. And you can see it says, hello from the load event. Hello from the load event. Okay, so we've now got, so this code was added to the response at the load event. Now we could add to the response at some other events as well. So for example, we could say protected void. Let's say, guys, so you guys tell me this. I want to attach this next method. I want it to attach to the first event that C# will fire off. So the first event that ASP.NET will fire off. So what am I going to call? What am I going to call that next method? What will be its name? I want to attach it to the first event. So what is the first event that is fired off in our ASP.NET lifecycle here? What is the first event that's fired off? Anyone know? So, okay, Chris says pre-init, precisely, yes. Okay, so it's the pre-init event. But remember that in order to call it that, so in order to attach the method to it automatically, because auto event wire up is set to true, I can just name the method page_pre-init. So you can see like the name of this method was load, that's the load event. The name of the other events is pre-init, right? So pre-init load, okay? So we're attaching to pre-init, that's the first event that's fired off. I'm calling it page_pre-init, okay? So this method is going to run when pre-init occurs, okay? So object sender event args e. So this is just the format that you have to give for these ASP.NET methods. We'll discuss what like arguments are a bit more in chapter 5. And I'm just going to say in this one, it's going to say response.write hello from the pre-init event. Okay, so hello from the pre-init events. Okay. like so. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to build this, but before I run it, I want to ask you guys, which one do you think will print out first? So which one will be on top? Which one's going to print out first? I'll label them for you. So like, let's say the second one. So this is going to be method 2. So you can vote for A or B. Which one's going to print out first, guys? A or B? B is going to print out first. Exactly, Chris. Yeah, precisely. B is going to print out first. Why is B going to print out first? Because it is the pre-init. Okay, it is pre-init. So pre-init, the event, comes before load. Okay, so we'll see that it'll print out first. So what I'm going to do, we've built it. I'm going to open it up in the browser again. Okay, it's opening. And you can see it says, hello from the pre-init event, hello from the load event. Okay, so the sequence of events makes sense in this case, right? So let's attach something to the init event as well. So let's do that. So I'll mark it as C, option C. So I'm going to say protected void page underscore init. Okay, why is it init? Because that's the name of the event, right? You can see inside the slide. So the name of the event that fires off at the initialization stage is init. So I'm going to say page underscore init, and we'll say object sender event args e, like so. And we're going to say response dot write, and this is just going to print out hello from the init event. Okay, hello from the init event. Okay. Cool. So now, guys, give me the order of the letters. Give me the order of the letters. What order will this print out in? B, C, A. Exactly. B, C, A. Okay, so it's going to say hello from the pre-init event, hello from the init event, hello from the load event. Okay, B, C, A. So we'll see that now. So I'm going to build. And I'm going to open it in the browser. And you can see it says hello from the pre-init event, hello from the init event, hello from the load event, right? Because they're occurring in that order. Cool. So the last event that we can attach to is pre-render, right? We've attached to pre-init, we've attached to init, we've attached to load. The last event that we can attach to is pre-render, okay? Pre-render. So pre-render is the last warning. It's the final warning where we can edit our response. So I'm going to say pre-render. Okay, object sender. Oh, that rhymes. Event args e, and we'll say response dot write, and this will be hello from the pre-render event. Now I would ask you for the order again, but I'm sure you guys get it by now. Right, we don't have to say the order again. You can see that obviously pre-render is going to print out last. Okay, so you can see pre-init event, init event, load event, pre-render event. So the events are occurring in the order that we expect, right? From our slide and from our study of the events and stages of the page lifecycle. Okay. However, there is one last question in the room about this little example that we're doing here. So there is one more event, right? So we're going to say protected void page underscore unload. Okay, see that? And yeah, cool. It'll have the same format. So we'll say object sender event args e. Cool. Now, what do you guys think would happen here? If I say response.write hello from the unload event. Is this okay? What do you guys think? Let's see, let's run it. Doesn't matter if something breaks, right? So I'm going to say run. And you can see it gives me this error over here. It says response is not available in this context. And it highlights line 38 for me. It says protected void page underscore unload. So this response, this line here where we say response.write inside page underscore unload, it's telling me that response is not available at the unload stage. Now, does that make sense from what we've seen in the slide? So you can see, number one, this threw us to the error stage, right? It threw us to the error stage. From the unload stage, we were thrown to the error stage because we tried to access response. But does that make sense? Let's think about what pre-render told us it was. Pre-render told us that this was a warning that the page is about to be rendered. It is the last time to change the response before the user will receive it, okay? The last time. So when I tried to edit response inside the unload event, the computer told me, no, I can't edit the response anymore. It's already been sent back to the user. Your last chance was in the pre-render stage, okay? So in the unload stage, we were just like, we're not able to edit the response. You can see it's very literally defined in the code. The response, that's the object that we've been editing, response. We are not able to edit that response anymore after the pre-render stage. The pre-render stage was the pre-render event. Sorry, it's not it is the pre-rendering stage as well. So pre-rendering stage, pre-render event. The pre-render event was our last chance to actually edit the response before it was rendered and sent back to the user. When I try to edit the response object inside page underscore unload, makes quite a lot of sense that it tells me that that is not allowed. So at this stage, what we would do is sort of like, obviously this is a very simple app, so there's nothing to clean up, but here we would clean up any memory that we need or close some database connections, that kind of thing. Okay, but in general, the how ASP.NET handles the unload stage will be good enough for most people. Okay, you won't really have to edit it too much. Okay, so we've seen each of these events now in practice, and you've seen that they do occur in the order that the page lifecycle prescribes for them. Cool. So that's good. Let's just see sort of one more idea. So you can also embed C# code into these HTML documents. Okay, this is this last thing that I want to show you at the bottom here, at the bottom of the slide. So these will be handled at the load stage. So you can embed the C# code. So what do I mean by that? So inside this part here, I'm going to say inside this div, I'm going to put like percentage like that. Okay. So what this means is is anything inside this tag is going to be interpreted by the server as C#. So the server is going to move over this request, because this is the request that it's preparing for the user throughout this whole load stage. This is the request that is being prepared. And so what we're going to see is anything that I type inside this expression, inside this tag. So I can say equals, and I can set it to whatever C# code I want. For example, 5 + 5. You guys know, HTML does not know how to do 5 + 5, right? HTML doesn't know what that means. It's just text to HTML. The addition is not defined, okay? So when I build this, you'll be able to see that, let me just make sure, because I don't want to lie to you guys. So you can see it prints out 10, right? See it prints out 10. So, by the way, remember, so the response, I can show you in the source. Let me just show you in the source. So you can see everything is added to the body itself, okay? But because it's where we typed the 10, that is the reason why it's just displaying below, okay? We typed the 10 into the HTML, we defined the template. So it still writes to the response in like a meaningful order. Even though this is inside the form. So even though it's handled at the response stage, because that's where all the controls are loaded, the rendering can still happen in the correct order if you define the template properly. But anyway, you can see it's 10. And you guys know that HTML does not understand what 5 + 5 is, right? So any C# expression you can put here, right? Like I can put 5 × 5, right? You guys know that that should give me 25 in C#. So if I go ahead and refresh this, you can see it's now 25, okay? So the server is processing that little expression. So if you want to run a C# expression inside on an ASP.NET server when you're preparing a request for a user, you can put whatever expression you want inside this little percentage tag. It's just a special tag that C# adds or ASP.NET adds to HTML. This little percentage tag, and you can say equals any C# expression. That can even be used to call some methods that are saved on your server. You can do a lot of fancy things with it. Okay, cool. So you now know how to embed C# expressions into these little ASP.NET files as well. But we do run into like another problem here. We do run into another problem when working with ASP.NET and servers, and that comes down to what we call state management. Okay, so ASP.NET and all other frameworks know how to maintain a state for each web page. We'll probably only see the different kinds of state ways that we can save state in the next lesson, because we've only got like 5 minutes left of this week. But a useful way of understanding state is literally just to see the definition of the word state. So like state define, okay? So you can see state, the word state means the particular condition that someone or something is in at a specific time. Okay, the particular condition that someone or something is in at a specific time. In this case, instead of condition, we're talking about like the values of variables, okay? And something, we're referring to our web page, okay? So the state is the current arrangement of values in variables and controls on a web page. So like the web page's state or the web application state is the current arrangements and values of variables, okay? So there are two kinds of state management that we need to deal with. There is client-side state management and there is server-side state management. Because obviously for the client, so for example, currently, if we look at this, what is the state of this web page currently? This little web page that I have here. We can see that this first input tag is set to an email address, and this password tag also has a particular value, right? We can see that the error message also has a particular value as well, okay? When I click sign in, again, everything has a particular value and its values are updated. So this is sort of the state. And you can see if I do actually sign in now, you can see that I now have a whole bunch of other states. Like if I close this tab, and I open the tab in like another, so I'm going to visit the same URL in another tab. Okay, so like so. You can see that I'm still logged in. See, I'm still logged in, right? So how does it know that? How is it maintaining that state? How does it know the value of my, like if you visit on your computer, you're not logged in, right? So how does it know that my values, my variables are set to me being logged in and your ones are set to you being logged off? How is the state maintained as I move around these different pages? When I click log out, how does it know? How does it process all of this information? How do the values of the variables change in order for it to understand what's going on? Okay, that's the state. That's the state. Okay, so you can see that there's a state on the server. So the server is maintaining a particular state of all the users that are logged in and of all the variables that are relevant for the server. And the client, like my computer over here, is also maintaining a state. So you can see it says welcome to EdgeAssess currently. If I log in, you can see it says welcome Joshua. How does it know my name? That's a variable, right? How does it know that that's my first name? Okay, that's because my computer is maintaining a certain state variable. Okay, the client, me, in my browser is maintaining a certain state variable that has my first name, and it knows to print it out there. Okay, so there's client-side state management, that's me managing my state, and there's server-side state management, the server managing its state. Okay, so we're going to discuss these two different kinds of state managements and the ways in which the state is managed in those two different cases, and we'll see a couple of examples. I think let's do that next week. Remember, guys, I am going to send that web tutorial for you guys, that tutorial on how to create your own website. Do go through it. It's a nice experience, and it's a good thing. Like at the end of the course, that you have like a practical thing out of it, right? You'll know how to create a website that can be available on the internet for other people to see, and you'll be able to like look back at the website and go, hey, cool, I've got a website. So there was something practical that came out of it. Okay, So I'll send that tutorial on a YouTube group. Please make sure to do it before next week, and we can all like show off our websites next week. If you have literally any questions, like while going through that tutorial, if you have literally any question, doesn't matter if you think it's silly or whatever, feel free to WhatsApp me and I will answer. Okay, so just like whatever questions you have while following the tutorial, just ask and I'll try to answer well. Okay. I might not answer immediately, obviously, like I do other things other than like stare at WhatsApp messages. But yeah, I'll do my best to get back to you ASAP. Okay, cool. All right, guys. So yeah, that's it for this week. Thank you. Enjoy your weekends. And yeah, see you all next week. Okay, next week, Saturday.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, thank you, Clark. Thank you for coming. Cool. Cheers, guys.